Greetings. My name is Alan Williams, and I wish to share with you a reflection on the particular history of development planning in Dominica. In September 2003, I had written a discussion paper entitled Setting the Goals and Reaching the Next Level 53 Concepts for Economic Planning in Dominica. Now, today I'm not going to burden you with all of that detail. What I'm going to do is to look at the compilation of the Integrated Development Plan in Dominica by a team of local development thinkers in Dominica at the dawn of the new century in 2001. It is important for us to understand why the IDP team in Dominica was so motivated as to attempt such a huge undertaking. That is, trying to bring all the scattered parts of economic activity in Dominica into a cohesive development action plan. We have to take ourselves back to the turn of this century and the rise of large populous economies like China and India on the global scene. The rise of these countries had begun a shift in the potential to accumulate global wealth by moving towards economies with large domestic consumer markets, and away from states like ours, where the domestic market was minuscule and the benefits from global economic growth were not having a serious impact on our development attempts. Developing countries were growing faster, but improvements in the well-being of their citizens had been much slower for the same rate of economic growth. We were seeing pockets of real poverty emerge among persons whose parents were relatively self-sufficient even at a lower level of existence. We were witnessing a personal anxiety within the community of development thinkers in countries like Dominica, struggling in all honesty to move past the clarifications of concepts and ideas of socialism and capitalism, and to start deciphering from the experience of others the principles that would guarantee us success. The IDP planners were no exception to this process. An OECD publication entitled Perspectives on the Global Development 2019 described the turn of the century like this, and I quote, "Shifting wealth has had a profound effect on global development. It changed global governance, offering developing countries new opportunities, but at the same time requiring them to craft their own new strategies. They were no longer willing to give us the new strategies, and we ourselves were less inclined to accept their worn-out recipes for growth and development. Indeed, the IDP willingly joined the debate as to how exactly to plan development in a creative manner. Let me start by giving you a short story on how to identify creative thinking. It goes like this. In Trinidad, we used to boast of a trick question to identify if you were really a Trini. You would be asked, what is the opposite of fresh? Now, if your response was stale or rotten or expired, you must have come from foreign, because the true Trini response would have been salt. Because everyone in Trinidad knows that as the nuts vendor passes around, he shouts out this binary choice, fresh or salt. The IDP also had a trick question. It was, what is the opposite to creative? The correct answer is programmed. So the IDP's creativity has to be judged by how many of its responses to the social and economic issues did not sound like the standard programmed response. The IDP was formulated by first listening to over 600 persons in all communities in Dominica, having them vent their feelings and express their visions of how things should be. This was done through sensitization meetings, workshops, and seminars. Immediately, two concepts began to rule the perspective for this integrated development plan. While the programmed response of development planners was to write as if they were a real perspective of a developing country or an emerging market, the IDP team, in relaying the vision expressed in its sensitization process, could only speak of its perspective as coming from the concept of a sovereign state. By now, the shiny glow of independence was being overshadowed by a growing dependence on someone else to provide us with aid, investment, and even with ideas for new institutions. This meant simply that the IDP had to continuously convey a profile of self-responsibility for the economy we want to build. This ties in neatly with the concept of accountability, which you will hear of later on. The second concept was that the reliance on technical personnel and theoretical concepts to design and determine the contents of the plan had to be replaced by a reliance on people's involvement. Thus, the foundation block of the IDP became its ability to treat the values and visions of the people as key determinants of the direction and strategy for national development, and as such, to provide a framework that would reflect the priority issues as determined by the stakeholders themselves. To complete the planning cycle and allow the national community to reach the next level, the IDP team also had to do the following: define mechanisms for ongoing stakeholder involvement in the preparation of the plan, establish a new approach to development planning and implementation that will highlight cross-cutting and cross-sectoral issues, and will require all stakeholders to signal their commitments during the planning process, and present a procedure in which an implementation plan directly influences the composition of public expenditure in the national budget. Now, let us look at the 5 most creative planning concepts within the IDP. Number 1, accountability. There are 2 significant uses of the term accountability. The standard program use is accountability through reporting functions. This is what we expect good public sector managers to do. The IDP, however, said something different. The themes that run through its plan is that accountability also comes through information sharing. When you become informed, you not only become smarter, but you also become more accountable. This accountability scenario played out in the IDP in 2 ways. In the first case, it played out in the regrouping of concepts and ideas. The IDP attempted to regroup concepts and ideas to bridge the gap between these various social and economic challenges facing Dominica. For instance, to the concept of vulnerability, the IDP attached the concept of economic exclusion. This is because globalization and trade liberalization can link different sectors of the economy to external stimuli for growth, but this can be to the exclusion of other sectors and individuals. To the concept of fiscal stabilization, which was prevalent in those days, the IDP added the concept of dynamic movements for growth. The challenge of the IDP was to present a plan that allows all stakeholders to participate in reinventing the economy. If you said, let us talk about growing the economy, the programmed response from the point of view of planners in 2001 would simply be to guide you into fiscal adjustment measures that would allow for a reduction in the level of public sector intervention as reduced public sector expenditures and possibly increased taxes, such like a VAT tax or something along those lines. As a matter of fact, part of the tax reform program undertaken by the government of Dominica in 2006 to simplify and rationalize the tax system in Dominica, the VAT or the value-added tax came into effect. The VAT replaced the consumption tax, sales tax, hotel occupancy tax, and entertainment tax. Nothing creative about this. Government also had to demonstrate sound management of the economy through policies to increase local business competitiveness and establish private sector priorities in the national agenda. The IDP came up with a framework to integrate both policy management in order to increase local business competitiveness, as well as to reduce the level of public sector intervention. In the IDP, growing the economy hinged on the task of capacity building in 5 specific ways. 1. Mechanism for participation in decision making. That is, you broaden the problem set. 2. Simultaneous management of information systems. The more people become accountable for economic growth. 3. Continuous programs for human resource development. Growth is built on the backs of human resources. 4. Accountability and responsibility must be driven by an information flow from a natural resources inventory. We must be aware of how we are using all of our resources. And 5. Cluster networks of business activities were to be nurtured to effectively implement the integrated planning scheme. Remember that in the IDP, more information sharing there is, the wider scope of accountability for economic growth. So you wouldn't find the program response of just investment by invitation within the IDP, or futile attempts by government-backed intervention to increase the productivity by using the Public Sector Investment Program, the PSIP. What we find are new measures like the medium-term public expenditure portfolio, through which private sector and civil society involvement can be driven. We also find an awareness momentum being infused into stakeholder participation in social service delivery systems, and we find some level of decentralized planning at the local level to ensure economic inclusion. 3. The contract approach. In various parts of the plan, the IDP encourages the government to enter into a social contract as well as an economic contract with other stakeholders, and to make these contracts the cornerstone of its commitments in international financing agreements such as with the IMF, the World Bank, and the EU. So what did the IDP seek to find in its growth models? Well, not the program response, which is large investments directed at critical sectors. It was more The creative response, which is an upswell of dynamic movements. The IDP went further than just trying to get some economic growth initiatives off the ground. Growth strategies were based on making the growth initiatives sustainable, that is, having their own self-generating dynamism. The three models in which self-generating dynamisms were diagnosed were the export growth model, the human resources development model, and the social recovery growth model. The central object of the IDP was to build responsibility for the management of the economy at the broadest level of society. 4. Another concept that you do not see today is the concept of local area concept plans. The empowerment of local government involved local area concept plans coupled with the available means within a social investment fund, providing the impetus for involving more NBO and CBOs in the delivery of social services. The plan allowed the major stakeholders, private sector, public sector, and civil society, to signal their commitments to specific economic and social action so that those may be integrated into a holistic approach to development. At the level of local communities, the IDP called for their desires and expectations to be translated into local area concept plans. These were to guide specific proposals in agriculture, tourism, education, and health, and the Social Investment Fund, which was expected to finance such local initiatives. So, if you were an investor attracted to Dominica for whatever reason, and you have the means to invest, it becomes easier for you to integrate your investment efforts in a specific local area concept plan. Economic exclusion. The programmed idea was to stimulate economic growth by appendaging ourselves to growth models in the global world economy. So our leading sector can be linked to and benefit from trade relations in the growing economies. But here was the big worry. At the same time, a significant part of the rural population may be excluded from capturing any benefits from such growth if they are not caught up in the supply chain. The IDP expressed such concern that the tourism sector may replace agriculture in export earnings, but if the level of local participation was not increased, the economy can regain growth without involving a significant proportion of the rural population. The creative response in the IDP focused on making the concept of economic inclusion a real commitment to bring more small businesses into the supply chain of any growing economic enterprise. The IDP also used this concept of inclusion in its approach to health. The IDP recognized some conditions that demanded a more comprehensive approach to health. These included poverty and its attendant deprivation, and the negative impact on nutrition, alcoholism, suicides, homicides, domestic violence, and societal violence. But here again, health and wellness were not simply sectoral concerns. The problem set had to be enlarged to the effect that the factors relating to high unemployment, particularly among youth, female-headed households, and the need for greater gender equitable development, these also needed to be caught up in the creative loop of dynamic feedback systems. There has been so much folly and misinformation about the integrated development plan of Dominica that it has become incumbent on some of its authors to explain some of the foundation concepts that have been revealed to us in our interaction with over 600 respondents over that period in the beginning of the century. Hopefully, a revisit of these ideas would guide the next generation of leaders to even more success. Thank you.